Hey everyone, Michael here. So, in my last video, I gave my thoughts on the Death Tea arc of the Yu-Gi-Oh manga. This time, I want to cover the Monster World arc, which covers chapters 41 through 59, and introduces the character of Bakura. Fun fact, not only is this the first appearance of Bakura, this is also the last arc of the series to be published with just the title Yu-Gi-Oh! In the West. Starting with chapter 60, the manga would shift into the Duelist Kingdom arc and would then begin to be titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist, and the chapters would restart to chapter 1. However, in Japan, the entire series, of course, continued to be titled simply Yu-Gi-Oh! And continued numbering the chapters as normal people would do. On that note, sit back as we delve into the fantastical world of Yu-Gi-Oh's Monster World. So, this arc opens with a handful of episodic chapters, which honestly I appreciated more this time around, for the most part. It was an appreciated break from the intensity of Death Tea, and did a lot to show how far the characters have come since the start of this manga. Except there were certainly some oddball stories thrown in. Most notably is the story where Yugi and Anzu go on a date at the carnival. Yugi's trying to sneak a peek, while all Anzu wants to do is force Yugi to change into Dark Yugi. And she'll do anything to make that happen. First, by yelling that some guy is trying to touch her just to get Yugi to protect her, which doesn't work because a bunch of other guys just pounce on him. After that, she hears that there's a bomber in the park who seems to be targeting the Ferris wheel. And oh no, what does Anzu do but get inside of one of the fucking Ferris wheel pods in hopes that Yugi will want to protect her by changing into Dark Yugi. What? Those are some drastic lengths just to get her dick wet. I mean, it works, kinda, but she almost dies in the process. This is a twisted level of attraction, if you ask me. Also, the chapter was still fun despite the odd choices in it. There's another story a few chapters later that features Jonouchi becoming obsessed with yo-yos, and he ends up getting jumped by a yo-yo gang that's run by his former gang/schoolmate, who also happened to force Jonouchi into his gang way back in the first arc. This is honestly wacky as all hell, and I am here for it. Jonouchi even gets to use Walk the Dog to... Oh. I thought Dark Yugi was fucked. Anyway, this section of the story featured several odd yet fun stories that mostly continued building on the characters and their relationships with each other, and especially their relationships with not only Yugi, but the spirit of the puzzle. Going into the next section, which is where we begin the arc proper, the relationships these episodic chapters display are put to the test. Will the relationships manage to hold, and will they get through the day in one piece? Well, I mean, yeah, probably, but how will they manage to get through it? Ryo Bakura is introduced as a shy, yet handsome transfer student in Yugi's class. He seems to be bright, and he's instantly popular with the girls. He and Yugi quickly build up a rapport based on a shared love of games. Bakura's game of choice happens to be tabletop role-playing games. His favorite is a cross between an RPG and a more traditional board game, called Monster World. The Yu-Gang, oh god, I said that. Yugi and the gang quickly ask Bakura if they can play a game with him, but Bakura is adamant that they can't and says it's because people have been mysteriously falling into comas whenever they play with him, and then he runs off. But Yugi and friends are like, nah, we gon' play Monster World. Because if there's a game around that Yugi has not played, then Yugi will not rest until he plays that game! So they decide to just drop by Bakura's apartment to play. Because, that's what friends do. Don't do this, please. Bakura is about to tell them no again, but then suddenly his expression changes and he invites them in. You see, Bakura has been keeping a secret. Games weren't the only thing Yugi and Bakura had in common. You see, they also both happen to have Millennium items. Where Yugi has the Millennium Puzzle, Bakura has the Millennium Ring. Okay, so in Death Tea, I said that Kaiba was the best foil for Yugi up to that point. And I still stand by that, but I mean that for what they both stand for thematically. There is another foil in this cast, and that would be Bakura. I think Bakura is also an excellent opposite for Yugi in terms of who both characters are, and the spirits they're both connected to. Yugi and Bakura themselves are a lot alike. Both are relatively kind boys who enjoy games and want to be able to share those games with their friends. You can see this with Bakura's choice in games, tabletop role-playing, a type of game you can only play with other people. There are many games that someone can play alone, which Yugi is seen doing in the opening of Chapter 1 and multiple chapters after that. But Bakura specifically wants to play a game that requires interacting with your friends. I think it's important to highlight that this type of game being used isn't a coincidence. Tabletop role-playing games are Takahashi's favorite type of game, so it makes sense that he'd use the game here to highlight this aspect of Bakura. It's also not the last time he'll be using an RPG for a whole arc. And while those two are similar, we also have Dark Yugi and Dark Bakura. They're alike in a few ways, I think, but also very different. I like to see Dark Bakura as what the Pharaoh could have become if he hadn't had the friends that were around Yugi. In many ways, I think Yugi's heart and world influenced the Pharaohs. In the first several chapters, we see many instances of Dark Yugi tormenting people with a smile on his face, but going forward, up to this point, he's shifted into more of a hero role. Dark Bakura, however, is a corrupt entity who only does something if it benefits him. He would even go so far as to sacrifice the real Bakura if it meant that his plans would still succeed. The Pharaoh, however, would be far less likely to do this, especially now. Yugi would want to keep his other self alive, and actively strives for that in this very arc. I'd like to mention that a lot of people look at this arc as the end of classic Yu-Gi-Oh! And in many ways I can see why. Following this, the series enters Duelist Kingdom, and most of the manga becomes about card games. Aside from that, this arc also features the first time Yugi and the Pharaoh actively work together to take down their foe, with the help of the rest of their friends no less. It's the culmination of all the storytelling that has led to this point. That's not to say I prefer the classic series over what comes later. I like the rest of the arcs past this to varying degrees too. At least one of them I actually like more than any of the arcs covered up to this point, I think. So, in this section of the story, we see all of the characters we've come to know have to put all of their faith on this one 3,000-year-old spirit and his ancient Egyptian magic. This is probably the largest test so far that their bond has had to endure, but honestly everyone is taking it like a champ. Everyone just has complete faith in Dark Yugi to get them out of this situation. Which, also, where do you find friends like them? Honestly, mine would just trade me for a fruit roll-up. I do love seeing the whole group work together like this. Although, this setup, this story, the fact that Jonouchi is a warrior and Honda's a gunman, where have I... Oh yeah, so in the Duel Monsters anime, there's an episode that follows this exact story in broad strokes. That episode featured Bakura trapping Yugi and his friends inside of cards and having to duel the Pharaoh in a shadow game. The anime did this a few times, one for each of the arcs that the anime skipped. Honestly, this episode was never one I was that into, and that's kind of accentuated now that I've read the full story in the manga. Just the larger story, with more time spent on the setup, rather than just Bakura just kind of showing up like he does in the anime. In the manga version, Yugi and Bakura play Monster World, a game where it's basically player versus DM. In this case, Yugi and Bakura fill those roles respectively. Unlike D&D or some other tabletop games, this game uses a percentile system featuring 2 D10s for their rolls. The closer to 00 you get, the better the roll. Bakura starts the game by cheating in a way that is not physically possible, but hey, they have ancient Egyptian magic, so whatever. Yugi quickly starts doing the exact same thing, just to show Bakura that he knows what's up. So Bakura plays it straight for a while, but eventually decides to use brainwashed dice, which are a pair of dice that he put the soul of a former player of his into. This helps him at first, but Bakura himself manages to fight against his darker half to help his friends. This is another example of Yugi and Bakura as foils. Yugi and the Pharaoh actively work together at this point in the story, but Bakura and his spirit are actively at war with each other, and each trying to suppress the other. An example is that the real Bakura actually manages to get through to the brainwashed dice, and gets them to roll a critical fail in order to hurt his darker half's plans. I actually love how much Bakura tries to fight his other half, and how far Dark Bakura will go to win this shadow game. He even goes so far as to stab the hand that normal Bakura is controlling using the model of the castle on the board, which is honestly metal as fuck. And I also guess that sort of injury just heals like nothing, because after this arc, Bakura's bandages are just gone. Ultimately, the battle comes down to one last roll to win the game. And it's here where Bakura puts part of his soul into the dice so he can roll what he needs to win. He just can't get enough of cheating in this, despite the fact that it just never works out for him. After he rolls though, the dice are destroyed because normal Bakura manages to put part of his own soul inside of the dice. He potentially sacrificed himself just to save the rest of the group, and honestly that's endearing as fuck. I love that Bakura gets to have such an active role in defeating the spirit of the Millennium Ring. I'd have come to expect Yugi to do most of the heavy lifting at this point, but honestly, he would have lost if not for Bakura's interference. He's best boy, don't at me, and I can't wait for more of him. So after they defeat Dark Bakura, everyone meets back at school, and Bakura is shown to have made a diorama showing off all the lead figurines that the group was sealed inside. It's a heartwarming way to end the arc as the main cast embraces its new member, who is also now immortalized with them in this piece of art.